You're in the middle of a growth phase, learning to run longer, speak a foreign language, or healing old patterns. And then you hit a wall, get stuck, or land on a plateau. We're going to talk about what contributes to those feelings and how you can begin to work with them. Welcome. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Rutstein, and this is the Wired for Wellbeing podcast, where each week we look through a nervous system perspective to see how you can transform the way you live, love, and relate. And each week I'm joined by my good friend and producer, Stephen Lessard. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Hey, Jeffrey. I'm doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm excited about us doing this.
Yeah, this will be a fun topic. We mentioned that this hasn't really been an area we've covered yet, so it'll be fun to dive in here with you.
I agree. So, what's our question for this week?
And Jeffrey, before I read the question, I want to remind everybody that if they want to support the podcast out, they can like, comment, subscribe, or give a 5-star rating, whichever system the platform they're on uses would help us out a bunch. And if you have a question that you'd like to send in, we love voicemails. The number for that is 866-357-5156. You can't access that phone number, or you'd like to send in a written email instead, like our questioner today, I'll put the email in our show notes. Okay, Jeffrey, the question. Our individual writes, can you share the difference between natural plateaus in the organic growth process versus pushing for the next phase of growth, versus how fear and shame keep us from continuing our healing journey? How do I tell the difference, and is there a felt sense between these phases? So Jeffrey, there's clearly kind of 3 phases in here, and I thought for our flow today, it might make sense just to really just take them one by one and maybe have you help us understand what the questioner is talking about in this organic growth process before we move on to kind of the next phase, the next section in this, the next 2 questions they've asked.
Great. So from my understanding, that's from my own experience and working with many individuals over the years, our growth seems to come in waves. There's times when we can have a growth spurt, just like a child can have a physical growth spurt. There are times when we sort of level up emotionally or psychologically or cognitively. And then there are naturally places where we slow down. I don't think that for the most part, these natural ebbs and flows are any kind of problem. I view the times when we're not growing as fast or maybe on a plateau as largely an opportunity for integration, for taking this change and growth into us and being with it, sitting with it, living with it for a while. So everyone's going to notice that it's not an even line of improvement and growth every day. It kind of goes up and down. And over time, we increase the curve. We learn more or we master more. But along the way, there's going to be times where we're not changing as fast, or it may feel like in some small ways, we don't feel like we're really growing at all. But that also can often be just a natural part of any growth process.
And Jeffrey, I see these, like I call them organic growth phases, really energized sometimes by like outward circumstances. Maybe I've read something, or maybe I've listened to a talk, or maybe I just got back from a trip from Canada, in French Canada, and I'm compelled to learn French again. Those feel like they're kind of, the energy from them is coming from external circumstances. Is that your sense? Is that the case? Is there more to it than that?
I think it can be both. I certainly think that we can respond to external, like going to Canada and finding a reviving of a passion and interest in learning French again. But even that's a little interactive. So the trip to Canada could land differently in 6 different people. But it happened to land in your nervous system, like someone else, maybe with some more issues inside. They may go, oh my God, I'd love to talk French, but I'll never master it. I won't speak like these people do. I give up, right? So it's partly external then, what you're getting exposed to, but also how it lands inside of you as beginning that growth process. But we can also have that growth process be energized from internal process. Um, our own feeling of, I've said for so long, I want to learn the guitar, and then I don't sit down and do it, and I don't sit down and do it. Finally, I say, like I gotta do something about this, or I'm just going to keep in the same pattern and never really learn this. And so there's a kind of resolve or an investment and a sense of energy to be able to engage in that process. Um, so I think outer and inner are both part of this. And again, when it stimulates this desire for not only growth, but follow through, right? Because that's another important piece of it. We can want a lot of change. We can want to learn a new skill or new language. We can want to get in better shape. But often we sometimes lack the follow through for a number of reasons. And I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves here. We'll probably circle back to that in a little bit.
So we've been mapping growth on maybe more tangible things like me learning a foreign language or someone learning the guitar. I'm intuiting that within this question, because it was sent into our podcast and the work you do, that there's probably a version of this that they're talking about their um, healing journey growth.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain is going to like, what might be some of those uh, growth trajectories in someone's healing journey that this individual or others may notice aside from learning the guitar or learning French?
So I think healing and growth follow all different forms of mm, learning or expanding our capacity or integrating something new. There are times when it's a very active process. For example, someone is working on healing their responses to trauma, or they're working on growing out of an identification with shame. And so there may be periods of time where they're really seeing that they're almost changing by leaps and bounds, or at least relatively rapidly. And then almost always at some point, followed by a little bit of that ebb, a little bit of that slowing down, where we kind of reach a plateau. And again, I think for many of the times that that occurs, that's just part of the organic process. We expand, we learn quickly, and then we may contract a little bit. We may pull back away from our learning. We, instead of having, say, for example, our work with our shame at the front of the list or top of mind, we may have done some work on it, and now we're beginning to focus on some other things, just daily things like a work deadline or a relationship issue. But we may be carrying in what we have learned or worked on uh, now into those relationships a little bit too. We're not at the end of our process, but we will dip in and out of more or less intensely focusing on our growth versus kind of having a more diffuse awareness of just bringing our awareness back to daily things, to daily life, or to some of our habits.
So this is a good transition as we move from this phase of growth that might be a little bit easier for us to access because it's a little, again, organic. It's a little bit more energized into this next phase where, as the person writing in shares, like this might take a little bit more effort or pushing, or they use the phrase pushing for the next phase of our growth. So they're highlighting a section of growth that takes a little bit more of our effort and work. And I'm wondering if we can kind of unpack that idea juxtaposed to the first idea we brought up.
So, sure. So there's many reasons that our energy and growth or healing may slow down. It could be that we've reached the end of a particular cycle of growth. And so, like sometimes in the days of old, you'd let your field lie fallow for a year. We do a diminished cycle of growth for a little while. And again, like I said, that often can be a period of integrating what we have grown into, right? Um, but there are other factors that can contribute to what seems like our growth slowing or halting or plateauing. One of the things, this is a big one for many people, is the fear and shame about outgrowing old patterns. For example, I've worked with many trauma survivors who kind of reached a ceiling of their contentment. Uh, and that as we explored it more, it was kind of like they're getting at an edge of, can I actually become happier than my parents? Can I actually leave the misery set point of my family if both parents were depressed or addicted or struggling or something else? And so for many people who've grown up in somewhat chaotic and somewhat dysfunctional families will often have this issue about, do I have to remain loyal to my family, to my parents, by staying in their groove of how much happiness, fulfillment, or growth I can have, versus should I stay in that route, or am I entitled to break free of that pattern and begin to explore something more expansive, more satisfying, more nourishing for me? And if we haven't worked with our shame, we'll notice that the shame and anxiety tag team us to make us begin to doubt ourselves, to make us lose interest in our growth, or to become much more preoccupied with things that fit the old pattern, like worrying about finances, or becoming much more doom centered, or fearful of consequences. Feeling like at first it could be just anything we're becoming more absorbed in. But if we step back a little, we can see that we're kind of resuming an old pattern. Now, that's a little different than a plateau. That's actually feeling like we're sliding a little back. I've learned, I've been free of these things for a while, or I can see my way through. And all of a sudden now I'm going back to a place where I'm trapped, where I'm totally caught in the fear, the anxiety, or the rumination in my head. And I was beginning to get free of that. So, one of the ways of noticing if fear, anxiety, or shame is participating is if, especially, we notice a little bit of a movement backwards, not just a plateau and holding our growth, but actually heading back towards our old normal, our former habits, which are not erased yet. And so we can step back into them, we can revive them in some ways. So that's one way of where fear and shame can have a heavy hand in affecting the process of growth and how happy or satisfied we can be, how much we can actually feel like we're growing, expanding, deepening our capacity to be in life.
Help me unpack this next idea here, Jeffrey, because it's coming out in fragments as I'm trying to put it together. I definitely see and can see those moments where we're growing, we're learning, things are maybe coming to us a little bit more easily, we're motivated, we hit these areas in our life that we've just discussed where maybe we're having to push a little bit, maybe some of that's due to our shame and fear. There's also a thing, and I don't know if this is connected to fear or shame. I guess is the question I have is, individuals who are like, well, I've done all of that work. Like I've progressed so much beyond that problem I've had or that challenge I've had, and I've made great work. And now here I am 2 months later, and I'm right back. I'm making the same decision, and I see people beating themselves up for that. What is that? Is that the same fear or shame? Is that something different in this phase that things aren't just coming easily and readily?
Well, I think just like we have natural pauses and plateaus in growth, we will also naturally have at times some regression, right? I mean, I can tell you how many times I had gotten into working out on a regular basis, felt great about it, and said to myself, I'm really going to stick with this, right? And then a month later, 2 months later, something happens. I injure something, I get sick, I have to travel, and all of a sudden I'm out of the habit. And then I don't get right back into it. And I can start feeling defeated. I can start feeling ashamed and disappointed in myself. But part of the problem was that I was expecting myself never to lose ground. Like, that's never going to happen. We're always going to be, just like we always move through states, we always move in and out of an openness and fluidity with growth. And so part of it is kind of noting that our growth will be cyclical, kind of like waves, right? Times of more growth and change, times of less growth and change, and even at times, uh, moments of returning to earlier ways of relating or inhabiting our nervous system. And one of the things that occurs is, like for me with working out, it became an interruption that broke the habit, right? But then I sort of slipped back into my tendency to not necessarily prioritize me taking care of myself. Wasn't conscious. It was just I was sort of backsliding a little bit because I had gotten out of that daily momentum and I started reprioritizing again function versus taking care of self, making sure I was getting my work done, making sure I was taking care of all of my emails. And when I fall a bit back into that, self care becomes definitely a second or third thought instead of a primary connection. Now, I do think that people can get to a point where they are able to consistently engage in self care. And that's part discipline, but that's also part feeling entitled to devote themselves to that. So when we step back into old patterns, it's usually because something has arisen that's caused us to feel unsafe in ourselves or in relationships. And so the natural tendency of our nervous system is to go back to a time and a strategy where we try to make ourselves safer, right? So in my family dynamics, it was always more helpful to attend to others' needs and others' goals than to my own. And I can see that pattern reasserts itself without hardly any thought, just by habit, especially if I'm not as focused on really tuning into what I need and trying to be true to that.
So there's something that's occurring to me here also before we move on to sort of the third bucket in this question, sticking with this pushing idea. That a few years back, I was working with a coach and it was a really busy time at work and I was making some great strides. And I hit a period of not really wanting to effort intensely. Still doing my work, but the energy to stay up till 10 o'clock at night working on a work project or, going the extra 3 or 4, or in my case, like 10 miles on a work thing just wasn't there. And I was questioning it. And he said, "Oh, hold on a second, Steve. You need to recognize the seasons that you're in. And you're maybe in a summer season, is what he called it. And this might be a lighter season for you to, sit back a bit more and reap what you've sowed and recover a little bit more from the work you had done." And that was a real big tension point to me because I felt like, well, I'm not growing, I'm not pushing forward. And it sounds a little bit like what you're talking about here. Like I didn't at that point feel like I deserved that break. Is that the right type of connection that I'm making there?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, especially for trauma survivors, but I think it applies to all of us regardless, there can be a tendency inside to feel like forward movement needs to be continuous. Underneath that, there can be a sense of shame, that feeling that I'm not good enough unless I'm growing. I'm not good enough unless I show people I'm a really hard worker and that I put in the extra hours and the extra miles and that that's part of my identity. And I don't want to let people think I'm a slacker or I don't care or I'm not devoted. And so those kinds of feelings and belief can easily distract us from paying attention to what we do need. So I think your coach's interpretation to you was a lovely one because it was helping reframe it in terms of your nervous system is doing this for its own wisdom, right? And our mind is trying to find out, well, is this a flaw? Is this a fault? I'm doing something I don't usually do. I'm taking my foot off the gas. I've never really done that very much before, and I don't usually feel good when I do. So it gives us information about maybe the pace that you feel you have to live up to be safe and okay. versus the pace that you may feel actually feels right, not what will keep you safe in other people's eyes, their respect, their connection, their wanting to work with you, but what does your own self, what does your own body, what does your own life need from you besides working until 10 o'clock at night? Maybe it needs to breathe. Maybe it needs some time where it's not so focused on getting everyone else's task done, but on sort of tuning into what you actually need or want in those moments. For many of us, we don't usually check into those qualities. We're kind of driven by a tendency to keep running, especially if, and this is very easily seen in all of us, but especially in trauma survivors, if we feel the version of me right now is not good enough. So I got to keep going to that future place somewhere out in time and space where I can be good enough, right? Where I can maintain that good enough, where people respect me and I can feel relaxed in my being because I know that everyone knows my public identity and they've accepted it, that I'm hardworking, that I'm very responsible and devoted, which are nice qualities, but sometimes we embody them for how other people will look at us instead of embodying them because they give us such meaning, such richness in our own life.
We've been playing with the idea of fear and shame a bit as we unpack this, but that was a named kind of third section in our questioner's question of how do fear and shame keep us from continuing on our healing journey. We talked a little bit about how it might keep us from pushing, but I don't know if there's more to unpack around the role that fear and shame might play more globally, not just in those moments we feel like we need to push.
Sure. So say I'm getting more in touch with my shame, and I'm trying to react less automatically to it. And so I may be saying no more often. I can't, instead of my automatic yes, sure, I'll do that. And I could be fine with that until I get someone's reaction who's displeased. No, I really don't feel like doing that. No, I don't want to push myself for that. And I read someone else's face and they look disappointed or hurt or angry. My nervous system picks that up and can eventually, immediately start seizing on a sense of feeling unsafe. Oh, they're mad at me. They're disappointed in me. I hurt their feelings. And then I can get caught up in, have I damaged the relationship? Will we no longer be as connected? And notice my thinking has left me and has gone to focus on them. And then I'm projecting that out to what could I lose, right? About, I, and again, it's because it falls into an old pattern that for me and my family, if I took care of me, right, it could be seen from example, my mother feeling like I wasn't attending enough to her. And she would get disappointed and she would look hurt if I had other plans than to carry out something she needed or wanted me to do. So something old can arise in a moment. And as we're trying to learn and grow into this new skill, we may find that someone else's reaction or even our projection, like someone could just look blank, but we could interpret that as, oh, I know they're disappointed in me. They're not smiling. They must be hurt or they must be angry. And they may not be. They may have been just a little puzzled or they could have been neutral. But I'm so expecting a negative reaction that fits my experiences from the past that I'll actually project that onto them and then start being afraid and feel ashamed that what I've done has damaged the connection.
So I'm hearing in this last area of our fear and shame keeping us from continuing on this healing journey that a big marker is the motivation. Like, am I doing this from someone else or am I doing it for me? And that motivation, that realization that like I'm doing this so they like me or so they want to be with me or so they feel heard or I don't know what the number of things are. Are there other markers that we're behaving in this more fear and shame, keeping us stuck realm, or is that the big one?
No, I mean, I think that they're all variations of like that. Like if I start being more assertive, will other people not like it? Maybe people were used to being very agreeable for everything. And maybe now I start saying no more often, or I express my opinion that may be different than this other person's opinion. And each of those times I'm doing that, in the first many times, it feels like a risk, right? It's new behavior I'm trying out. And all of us do these adaptations to not lose connection, right? That somehow in our life, it was safety felt like it was aligned more with drifting away from us, not staying inside of our own experience, our own needs, and that doesn't mean that we're ruling out other people. It just means that, especially with trauma, but for many of us with dysfunctional parenting, it's easier for us to step out of our orientation and connection with us and to sort of leap into the other person's world of needs or thoughts and wanting to make that okay. And, you know, healing and growth is, I think, ultimately on one level, becoming more and more comfortable in our own skin, in our own way of being, we sometimes use this word authentic, our authentic way of being, not the way of being we know how to please other people or work hard for other people, but like you're moving into a summer season in regard to work, might be a very authentic movement of, instead of being compulsively driven to perform, you are able now to take into account what really may feel natural in the moment. And allowing yourself a season of less pushing may be exactly what your mind and body need. And at the same time, because it's new, you'll have some questions about, oh my goodness, I'm getting lazy, or I'm stopping efforting, or this doesn't feel like me. I'm never like this. What are other people going to think? So it can circle back into shame. It always does at some level, even if our first brush with it feels more like it's related to anxiety. It's anxiety about being different from someone else. It's anxiety about showing us and not being received. We show ourselves and we're rejected, criticized, or mm, tormented because we dare share our views, our needs, our opinions.
So we've been unpacking a little bit what it might look like and feel like in this fear driven state. And I want to kind of go back up the ladder of questions that we had and sort of return to this pushing idea, because I want to make sure we leave our listeners and viewers with kind of a little bit of a felt sense or an understanding of what it might feel like and look like and be like to live in this pushing phase. When do we know we're in this pushing phase of growth?
One of the ways is when we begin to experience ourselves in a binary. I'm good if I'm moving and I'm bad if I'm not. I'm good if I'm growing and bad if I'm not. That can let us know that the pushing is really related to an inner sense of shame, and that the good me will work out every day and never give up my workout process. A good me will keep growing every day. I'll keep learning more about myself or the world or this new language or improve my running stride. And it's a bit unrealistic. It's kind of also expecting life to be perfect. It's not going to be. It's going to have ups and downs, and we're never going to stay in the same state, right? Like every day we're going to move through different states. Sometimes patients will say to me, I just want to be regulated all the time. Well, that's a lovely desire, but it's not necessarily true for the vast majority of humanity. Some people can absolutely work towards being more regulated more consistently, but we're still humans. We're still going to be moving in and out of our states. And depending upon our state, that determines how much follow through we have. So if I'm in shutdown and collapse, right, and what can send me there? Shame, feeling rejected, hurt, disappointment. I can easily go into shutdown and collapse. And when I go into shutdown and collapse, I will have very little, most likely even no energy to invest in self care. I will have energy to self protect, meaning I will go and shut down and disconnect. But I will feel pretty much like I don't have the oomph in me to really do anything, including care for myself in a significant way. And I think that sometimes we can notice we're in a shutdown state, and then we can do things to raise our energy and mm, have enough energy available that we can move from I can't, which is the operant saying for when we're in shutdown and collapse, to when we have some access to fight or flight, where we are able to say the operant saying there is I can, right? I can follow through with this. I can take on this task. I can complete this. But if we are in that shutdown place, we're going to feel very far from that. And because shutdown is also the neighborhood where shame lives, that we'll have a likelihood to judge ourselves for being there. It sort of adds insult to the injury. We're already in a shutdown state. There's a reason why we got there. It's not our fault. It's totally normal. But then we start creating stories about why I suck in particular because I make myself go here, or I become lazy, or I don't care anymore, or what happened to the me that was here last week. We look at it in terms of a natural cycle. We look at it in terms of a failure or a failing.
What's coming up for me now is a realization that maybe I should have led with this question, but here we are, 30-ish minutes in. So, what a
Cool.
better time than now.
Mm-hmm.
In our questioner, we've been kind of playing with these three phases that they've sort of identified in their experience. I guess the question is like, are there other aspects of growth we haven't spoken about? Are there other phases of a growth trajectory that we should be aware of? Or does what we've kind of unpacked in the spectrum kind of cover, I guess, cover the spectrum? Does it cover the range that of experiences we might have?
I think it does. I think it does because naturally we're going to move in and out of growth. What we do when we're out of that growth cycle, whether we turn it negative or whether we accept it as a brief season of summer, is very, very different, right? If I reframe it as a brief summer, I'm showing some kindness and compassion towards myself and the present moment. You know, last week we were talking a little bit about surrender, right? And when you fight with reality, you lose. Reality wins, right? Some of that applies here too. If we expect ourselves to always be the excellent student who's always growing, who's always got everything, who's always an A+ student in life, we are setting ourselves up for failure. It's unrealistic. Now, our questioner did ask, is there a felt sense difference, right? And I just want to make sure we touch on that too, because there is. So if you notice that you're criticizing yourself, if you notice that you're feeling bad that you're not moving forward, then I'd invite you to see if you can move a bit towards regulation. Because if you're feeling negative and judging, you have some mixture of some fight, some anger, and some shame mixed together. That's a very common combo. We can also have anxiety and shame mixed. If I move a little bit more towards regulation, right? And again, one of my favorite quick moves is hand on the heart and hand on the face heart connection. And I let myself settle and just breathe here for a few moments, noticing and lingering with noticing the way that each hand contacts my body and how that feels, how I actually experience it in the moment. That helps me move towards regulation. And from there, I actually have a better chance from a slightly more spacious view to feel into what's here. Because sometimes then we go, oh, I just need this time. I'm just tired, right? And just like we'll all go into shutdown and collapse, none of us will stay there forever. But sometimes we're afraid, oh my God, I'm always going to be in shame. Oh my God, I'm always going to be despairing. Oh my God, I'm always going to be tired. And while people can feel that's a lot of their experience, it's never always their experience unless there's a real physical illness or brain injury that's going on. Otherwise, we will move in and out of those phases. So if it's a natural organic plateau and we move a little bit more towards regulation, get a couple of toes in regulation, we'll begin to feel that being in that space is not so painful in and of itself. What we will notice is that the pain comes from our judgment. We should be further. We shouldn't be going backward. We should continually move forward. And then those are almost always coming from shame, not coming from reality. So, being embodied, you'll notice when you think about growth or what's not happening, if you feel a large contraction, tightening in the stomach, the throat, the chest, that's a sign that there's some mm, nervous system influence. It's not coming from a regulated and clear seeing place. It's coming more from a place of fight, flight, or shutdown. And that's not needed necessarily when we're looking at growth or even participating in growth. Again, to have a little bit of sympathetic fight or flight in our system is helpful to making forward progress. But having more than a little can turn on the drivenness, the compulsiveness, and the rigidity. If I'm not making progress, I suck. What's wrong with me? I haven't made progress in 2 days. Or I'm still only running a quarter mile every day. And in my mind, I said by now I'd be running a mile a day, or I'd be so much further along in learning guitar or in learning this language. We can come to see that some of our expectations for growth were based entirely on a thought-based cognitive model instead of what we're really able to do, right? And that's also part of this is we can't necessarily progress at the speed of what our thoughts tell us to, because our thoughts are not in charge of our nervous system. They're not in charge of how we access different places of energy or loss of energy. Our nervous system shifts in and out of those. And as soon as it does, we create stories from that place that help to keep us stuck there. So, for example, if I'm disappointed that I haven't been making progress and I start going into the shame story of, oh, this is always me, I try stuff, I never follow through, I suck, I suck, I suck, then that's going to help me stay further and longer in a shutdown and feel like I can access energy to take care of myself or to grow will feel further and further away. I think it was Brene Brown that had spoken about that one of the more insidious pieces of shame is that it actually robs us when we're in shame of having the energy to do something about it. If I'm feeling shame for not taking care of myself, the more I'm in shame, the less I'm actually able to take care of myself. Even though I'm feeling shame for not taking care of myself and wish no more than to be able to do it, the very fact of staying in shame doesn't get me closer to engaging in self care or in growth. It gets me closer and deeper into feeling I suck, I'm failing, I'm no good, I'm lazy. It's me again, hoping to grow and disappointing myself in the world.
Jeffrey, before we jump into sort of the last area that I want to go with this, I just want to quickly share with everybody listening and watching that we deeply appreciate your questions, like the question received here. And that if you have a question, we love getting them via voicemail. And that number is 866 357 5156. You can leave a voicemail, leave it anonymously, leave your name. It's entirely up to you. And although that is our preferred method, we realize some people can't access that phone number extension from the country they're in, or some people are just more comfortable typing something out. So, friends, I will leave a link to the email that you can send that to in the description down below. Jeffrey, the last area I want to go with this is I'm imagining someone who's been listening to this and isn't quite sure what they're growing towards or why they're growing. And a phrase I wrote down early on in the episode here today was growth needs a why, right? There needs to be some intentionality. So I want to give you a chance to talk to maybe those individuals who've maybe lost their why in their growth process, or who are having a hard time even identifying what they're trying to grow towards?
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a great question, and it's also a complex one because some of us take as goals for growth what we feel other people want from us.
Tricky.
And then is our growth really for us or is it to please other people, to be acceptable to other people, to be worthy of their continued connection or affection versus being more in touch with what actually we desire. And here's the rub for many folks, especially for people who've had trauma, is that they've had so many years of abandoning themselves to be more focused on others that they've lost touch with actually being connected to or resonant with what they actually want from themselves. So, a growth process in and of itself is to learn how to re inhabit ourselves, to get back in touch with actually what we think and what we want and what we value, instead of a life that has been set before us by other people's expectations, by their thoughts and words about who and how we should be in the world. So that's one very important thing. We'll get much less further along if we're trying to grow for someone else than if we're actually in touch with why we want to grow in that direction for ourselves. Another thing is that many people don't really inhabit their body. They're not really in touch with their body, and our body is the primary place where we can actually feel a sense of our needs, wants, desires, values. It's not just a cognitive thing, it's not just thought, but it's actually something that's deeply felt. And so, uh, if folks have been disembodied, have learned how to shut down access to what they want and need so that they can be more deferential to everyone else's wants and needs, then part of the growth process might need to include becoming more in touch with their true wants, their true desires, what they truly value for them. Because if we're in touch with that, we'll go much further because we're not doing it out of compliance for other people. We're doing it out of a sense of care for ourselves. So that's one big piece. The other piece is to really accept that we will move and grow like the waves do in ebbs and flows. And that to expect any different is to kind of expect that we're not human. And that often comes from a belief that I need to be perfect, or I need to be consistent, or I need to show everyone I'm always moving forward. Or it can be from our own disgust, our own anger, and shame at ourselves about where we are. And I can't stand myself and I'm like this. I have to get out of myself. The irony, right? And I know this is a tough one. Carl Rogers said this best many, many years ago. He was a psychologist, a humanistic psychologist. He was the father of humanistic psychology, and I think it was a client centered approach. And he spoke about the irony is the moment that I can accept myself completely as I am right here and now, I then become capable of change. What he was pointing to in a very elegant way was if I'm hating myself, I'm not going to be able to change much. I'm going to be too busy shaming and hating myself as I am to actually just be with it so I can move beyond it. If I accept myself as I am, that doesn't mean I'm giving up, that I'm surrendering a desire to improve and to grow. It just means that if we can come into a relationship with how things are right now, and none of us are where we are because there's something wrong with us. Each of us is in our own place of growth or plateau because of what our nervous system learned most likely in our childhood. And that determines a lot about how consistently we're able to grow, even if we're allowed to grow much, or in what ways we're allowed to grow. If we can start seeing that my nervous system isn't messed up or a failure, it's just doing what it knows how to do to protect me from its perspective of what feels safe. Then, with a little bit of kindness and compassion, if I'm seeing myself for where I am, change and evolution and expansion all become much more within reach. And going back to our caller again, I would suggest that feeling into this, right, with a gentleness, without a demand or expectation show, she has to keep growing, may help her get more in touch with what is occurring. And if she can feel into what she's judging herself about when she's not moving, that can also give tremendous information about the kind of current conflict that her nervous system is still wrestling with. And often I said it's a combination of shame and anxiety, or shame and anger. That's very different than thinking there's actually something wrong with us.
Jeffrey, I want to thank you for your time and your wisdom in helping to unpack this topic. And I know you have a free gift for everybody, and maybe can tell us a little bit about that and where they can go find it.
So if you'd like a free gift, Steve and I created a video, Why Do I Keep Feeling Stuck? And you can get that. Just go to drjeffreyrutstein.com/links. That's plural, LINKS. There'll be an option there on that page to get your free gift. You can just sign up for that and it'll be delivered to you. That goes into more of an explanation of the different nervous system states and outlines a few easy practices that you can begin to use to help you shift from whenever you feel dysregulated. Remember, if you also found value or appreciated this, please feel free to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Steve, as always, thank you for the companionship and for the great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciated the conversation today, enjoyed our time together, and I will catch you next week.
Sounds great. Remember, friends, this podcast is for informational purposes only and isn't a substitute for professional mental or physical health care. If you are struggling, please find and consult with a qualified healthcare professional. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time, bye for now.